Dale Mercer paid the bartender to poison the Hells Angels president's drink. One drop. Colorless. Dissolved before the glass hit the tray. The bartender had done it in under a second. Nobody in that room saw it happen. Nobody except the waitress standing 8 feet away, the one nobody had ever bothered to look at. She picked up the tray. Her legs carried her toward table 4, heart hammering against her ribs. Mercer was sitting right there across that white tablecloth, deep in conversation, completely focused on the man beside him. She leaned in to set the drinks down. 1 second. Mercer's eyes moved to the man on his left, and in that exact moment, her fingers found the poisoned glass and slid it, smooth and silent, across the tray. The 2 glasses had been switched. She straightened up, stepped back, clasped her hands behind her apron so they would stop shaking. Mercer reached for his glass without looking up. Cole Hargrove hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on her face. He had watched every single thing she just did. This is Heart Tales. Now let's go back to where it all started. Mercer raised his glass. To new business? He drank. The room kept moving. Conversations layering over each other. Ice clinking against crystal. A jazz record turning somewhere in the far corner of the room. 12 seconds. Then Mercer's hand went to his throat. His fingers found his collar and pulled at it slowly at first. Then, with a sudden desperate urgency, like a man trying to loosen something that wasn't there, the color left his face in a single wave, top to bottom, replaced by a gray that had no business being on a living person. The glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the tablecloth and shattered. He went down hard. His chair caught the edge of the table crystal. Lean in. A full decanter of scotch, everything going over at once, hitting the marble floor in a single catastrophic crash. His body followed, 230 pounds. The Persian rug buckled beneath him, and he clawed at his own chest with both hands. Eyes blown wide, mouth working open and closed without making a sound. Then the sound came. A wet, ragged thing that filled the room and silenced it completely. Frankie was on his feet before the last glass stopped rolling. His weapon was out swinging across the room without a fixed target. The specific panic of a man whose plan has collapsed and who hasn't yet decided what to replace it with. Boss somebody, call somebody. Cole's man stepped between them. One hand. One sentence. Put it down. Frankie looked at the barrel, pointed at his chest, and his arm dropped. The room came apart. Ruth Calloway, who had owned Copperline Lounge for 19 years, who had seen things in this room that she would carry to her grave, and had made her peace, with that stood behind the long service bar with both hands pressed flat against the mahogany, watching Dale Mercer convulse on her Persian rug and understanding, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that nothing in this room would ever be the same after tonight. Chairs overturned. A woman at table 2 was screaming. Men who had spent careers projecting unshakable calm were scrambling for exits with the same raw animal urgency as everyone else. Cole Hargrove sat completely still. He set his glass down on the tablecloth. Slowly. Deliberately. The way you set something down when you want the gesture itself to be understood. Then he turned his head toward the velvet curtain at the far edge of the room. Claire was pressed flat against the wall behind it, both hands over her mouth, her whole body shaking in long, uncontrollable waves. She had watched a man go down. A man who had been trying to kill someone else. With poison she had redirected with her own 2 hands. The thought kept arriving in the same flat, factual voice, without mercy. I did that. I did that. I did that. Cole looked at her through the chaos, through the screaming and the overturned furniture, and the sound of a dying man on the floor with an expression that asked for nothing and offered everything. One single nod. Barely a movement. Just enough. Claire pressed her back harder into the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. Outside. The first sirens were already turning onto Beale Street. Stay with me. Because what happened in the hours after that moment, what Cole did, what Claire ran from, and what she carried home that night, that's where this story really begins. Claire Bowen had worked the floor at Copperline Lounge for 4 years. 3 months. And 11 days? She knew this because she had counted, not obsessively, not out of bitterness. The way you count things when counting is the only form of control available to you, one shift at a time. One apron tied and untied and tied again. The men who came through those doors never looked at her. Not once. Not in 4 years. She was the woman who brought the scotch and cleared the plates and refilled the water glasses before anyone had to ask. She was furniture. She was wallpaper. She was the specific kind of background noise that a room full of powerful men produces without noticing the sound of things being handled so that they could continue to exist without handling anything themselves. She was 31 years old. She carried her weight the way some women carry grief openly. Without apology, because there was no point pretending it wasn't there. And for 4 years, that invisibility had been the most valuable thing she owned. Because the men at Copperline Lounge talked at table 4 about shipments coming through the river port that had nothing to do with the manifests filed at the customs office. They talked at table 7 about a city councilman who owed more than he could ever repay, and exactly what form that debt was going to take when the time came to collect. They talked at the bar, late, when the room had thinned out and the expensive bourbon had done its work, about the kind of arrangements that don't get written down anywhere because the people making them had learned across long careers in rooms like this one. That paper has a way of surviving its owners. Claire heard all of it. She heard it because she was invisible. Because nobody lowers their voice for the furniture, she filed it away behind her pleasant, professional smile and carried it home every night to the apartment on Vance Avenue where her mother slept in the back bedroom with the oxygen machine running its steady mechanical rhythm. And the rent was due on the 1st. And the tips from a place like Copperline were the only thing standing between that apartment and everything she refused to think about. Ruth Calloway had hired her 4 years ago. Ruth was 61 years old, had owned Copperline Lounge since she bought it from a man who didn't deserve it for a price she couldn't afford, and ran it with the specific competence of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that surviving in a room full of dangerous men required being useful to them without ever becoming dependent on them. She interviewed Claire for 11 minutes, looked at her for a long moment after the last question, and said, "You start Monday. Don't be late and don't be stupid and you'll be fine." Claire had been neither. Ruth watched over her the way a woman watches over something she has decided matters without quite being able to say why, quietly. From a distance, with the particular care of someone who knows that calling attention to the thing you're protecting is the fastest way to put it in danger. Claire had one rule she had built her survival on: see everything, say nothing, survive. She had kept that rule for 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days, until the night Gary Sim's thumb moved over the rim of the 3rd glass. I need you to hold something in your mind as we go forward. Something small. Something that happened 6 weeks before that night on a slow Tuesday. At the end of a quiet shift that made everything else possible. Cole Hargrove had come in alone that Tuesday, which was unusual. He always arrived with at least 2 men quiet. Watchful men who sat with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the door. The kind of men whose job was to be present without being noticed, and who were very good at it. That Tuesday he walked in alone, sat at table 4, ordered a bourbon neat, and didn't say another word for 40 minutes. Claire refilled his water twice. He didn't acknowledge her either time. The 3rd time she came to the table, he was holding his left hand flat against the tablecloth, pressing down on it with a steadiness that looked like concentration. She noticed because she noticed everything. And because the knuckles were split not fresh, but not old either. The kind of split that happens when a large amount of force meets something hard and neither one gives. She set the water down. "You want ice for that?" He looked up. Like he was genuinely surprised she had spoken. He looked at her for a long moment, the way people look at you when they are making a decision about something that has nothing to do with the question you just asked. "Sure," he said. She brought ice wrapped in a bar towel. He pressed it against his knuckles without a word. She turned to leave. "You've been working here a long time." It wasn't a question. 4 years. She said, "You pay attention." She didn't answer that. In a room like Copperline Lounge, being told you pay attention was not necessarily a compliment. He looked at her steadily. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to tell you something. You can do whatever you want with it." She waited. "There are people in this room," he said quietly, "who would not like knowing how much you've seen. You understand what I'm saying?" She understood exactly what he was saying. She had understood it for 4 years. "I've seen nothing," she said. The answer she had given 100 times. Smooth. Flat. Automatics. The answer that had kept her alive. Cole Hargrove looked at her for a long time. One day that answer might not be enough. He said, "One day something is going to happen in this room, and you're going to have to decide in about 3 seconds whether to act or walk away. And if you decide to act, you won't be able to say a word, because the wrong person will be watching." Claire stood very still. "If that day comes," he said, "and you need help switch the glasses on your tray. Anetwo, put the wrong drink in front of the wrong man. I'll see it. I'll know what it means." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" He pressed the ice harder against his knuckles, looked at the table for a moment like a man choosing between two versions of the truth and deciding that one of them wasn't worth the effort of pretending. "Because 4 years is a long time to carry something alone," he said. "And because nobody in this room has ever once looked at you, but I have." He left a tip of $63 on a $12 drink. Claire stood at that table for a long time after he was gone, bar towel in her hand. The ambient noise of the room moving around her like water around a stone, and thought about what it felt like to be seen. She was still thinking about it 6 weeks later. Standing at the service well, watching Gary Sims' hand move toward his jacket pocket. Keep that Tuesday in mind. Because the woman who picked up that tray wasn't acting on instinct, she was acting on a decision she had been carrying, quietly, for 6 weeks. And that changes everything about what it means. The night it happened started like every other night. Claire arrived at Copperline Lounge at 6:47, changed into her uniform in the back room, tied her apron twice, once loose, once tight, the way she always did when her hands needed something to do that wasn't thinking. Checked the reservation sheet. Table 4, booked for 9 o'clock. Private party. 6 covers. She had learned, a long time ago, that table 4 was never just dinner. By 8:30, the room was half full. The usual faces. The usual conversations that stopped just slightly too fast when she approached to refill a glass. She moved through it all the way she always moved. Steady. Quiet. Invisible. At 9:14, Dale Mercer walked through the front door. She knew who he was, the way everyone at Copperline knew who he was, not from anything said directly, but from the way the room changed when he entered it. Conversations adjusted. Volume dropped half a register across every table simultaneously. Posture straightened almost imperceptibly. The specific, practiced alertness of people in the presence of someone who could, if he chose to, make their lives very difficult. Mercer was 58 years old. Silver-haired. The kind of well-dressed that wasn't about the clothes, it was about the certainty, worn so long it had become physical, that whatever room he walked into, he already owned it. He owned Copperline Lounge. He owned the shipping contracts along the river port, the legitimate ones and the other kind. He owned 3 members of the city council and 1 sitting judge. He had been careful for 30 years. He had built the kind of operation that swallows questions before they can be asked. He settled into his chair at table 4 with the ease of a man sitting in a room that has always belonged to him. Claire noticed it first in the way Gary Sims was moving behind the bar. Gary was a nervous man on his best days, thin, quick-eyed, with the particular restlessness of someone who owed more than he earned, and had been owing it long enough that the anxiety had become structural. She had worked alongside him for 4 years. She knew when something was wrong. Tonight, something was very wrong. He was moving too deliberately. Setting up the service well with a focus that had nothing natural in it, the focus of a man who has rehearsed something until the rehearsal has replaced the original action entirely. She watched him line up 3 glasses. She watched his eyes move to table 4. She watched his hand move toward his jacket pocket. Her water pitcher stopped moving. At table 4. Mercer was leaning back completely relaxed, listening to the man across from him with the patient attention of someone who already knows how the conversation ends. To his left, 2 men she didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered, watchful. Across from Mercer sat Cole Hargrove. Cole was listening, nodding occasionally. His bourbon sat untouched in front of him. He always let his first drink sit for 20 minutes. The habit of a man who had learned not to trust anything he hadn't watched being poured. She looked back at Gary. His thumb was already moving over the rim of the 3rd glass. The room kept moving around her. Jazz from the corner speaker. Ice in a bucket somewhere. Someone laughing at the bar. She stood completely still at the service well and felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She thought about her mother's oxygen machine running its rhythm on Vance Avenue. She thought about 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days of seeing nothing and saying nothing and surviving. She thought about $63 on a $12 drink. And a man who had said, because nobody in this room has ever once looked at you, but I have. She had 3 seconds. Gary set the 3 glasses on her tray without meeting her eyes. Table 4. The words came out flat. Rehearsed. The voice of a man who has told himself that saying the words is different from making the choice. Claire looked at the tray. She looked at table 4. She picked up the tray. And she walked. Cole didn't move for a long time after Mercer hit the floor. The room collapsed into chaos around him, Frankie screaming. Paramedics being called. Men who had spent careers cultivating composure, scrambling over each other toward the exits with the same animal urgency as everyone else. He sat in the middle of it with the stillness of a man who has already done his calculations and is simply waiting for the situation to catch up. Then he stood up. He walked to the bar the way he walked everywhere, steady. Unhurried. Gary Sims was behind the counter, both hands flat on the mahogany, face the color of old chalk. He was watching the chaos at table 4 with the expression of a man who understands, with a completeness that leaves no room for negotiation, that every exit he had been mentally mapping for 3 weeks had just closed simultaneously. Cole's man was already there. One hand on Gary's shoulder. Not a grip, just a presence. The specific weight of a door that has been quietly locked. Cole stopped on the other side of the bar and looked at Gary the way you look at someone when the conversation is already over and what remains is formality. I didn't have a choice. Gary's voice came out wrong too high, cracking in the middle. He came to me 3 weeks ago. He knew about the money I owed. He said if I didn't do it, I know what he said. Cole said. Gary stopped. Who else knew? Just Mercer. And Frankie. Frankie handled the logistics. Mercer wanted you gone so the North Side contracts would restructure. Nobody would ask questions. That's enough, Cole said. He turned from the bar. Across the room, 2 of his men had Frankie against the wall beside the emergency exit, not violently, just permanently, in the way that communicates that the geometry of available options has been completely resolved. Frankie had stopped shouting. He was looking at Cole with the expression of a man who has just finished a calculation he wishes he hadn't started. Cole walked toward him, stopped 2 feet away. The contracts. Port schedules. Every conversation you had with Mercer about our operation, you're going to write it down. All of it. Tonight. Frankie's jaw tightened. I want a lawyer. You'll get one, Cole said. After. He left Frankie with his men and walked to the window. Outside. Beale Street was washing blue and red. 2 ambulances. 3 cruisers. A crowd pressing against the barrier tape. His phone was already in his hand. 2 calls. 30 seconds each. What Dale Mercer did not know, what he had never considered. In 30 years of building the kind of operation that swallows people whole was that a federal task force had been assembling a case around the Riverport contracts for 6 months. What they had lacked was a witness with internal knowledge willing to talk. Gary Sims. It turned out, was willing to talk. By the time the paramedics loaded Mercer onto the stretcher alive, barely 3 federal agents were waiting at the hospital entrance with a warrant and a folder containing the names of 11 people whose cooperation had already been secured. The stretcher rolled through the doors. Cole was standing at the bar when they passed. Mercer's eyes were open. He was conscious barely, intermittently, and he turned his head as they wheeled him past. Their eyes met. In that moment, Cole watched something move across Dale Mercer's face, not fear exactly, not anger. Something quieter and more final than either. The specific expression of a man of genuine intelligence who has just seen all at once every assumption he built 30 years on, and understood exactly how wrong he was about all of them. He had never once looked at the waitress. Cole held his gaze until the doors closed. Then he turned back to the room. The velvet curtain at the far edge was still. Claire was gone. He stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space where she had been. Then he walked to the door and said one word to the man beside it. Fin here. Claire hit the service exit at a run. The alley behind Copperline smelled like river, water, and cold concrete. Her coat was still in the locker room. She didn't go back for it. The November air off the Mississippi cut straight through her uniform shirt and she barely felt it. She just walked. Fast. Head down. The way she had learned to move through the world when the world felt like it was closing in, purposeful enough to look like she was going somewhere. Controlled enough not to draw eyes. The thought kept arriving in the same flat voice. Without drama. Without mercy. I put the poison in front of him. I switched the glasses. I watched him drink it. Past the shuttered pawn shop on 2nd. Past the all-night pharmacy on Union, where she had filled her mother's prescriptions every 3rd Thursday for 4 years. Past the laundromat on Vance that stayed open until 2 a.m. and never asked questions about the woman who came in sometimes at midnight just to sit in the plastic chairs and breathe. She couldn't go home. Her mother was there. The oxygen machine was there. The one person in her life who still needed her to be okay was there. Asleep. Not knowing that her daughter had just changed the trajectory of the rest of her life in 2 seconds at a table on Beale Street, she couldn't bring whatever was coming next through that door. She stopped at the corner of Vance and 3rd, pressed her back against the brick, tried to get her breathing level in through the nose, out through the mouth. The way she had taught herself during the bad years. That was when she heard the engine, love, steady, coming from the direction of Beale Street, moving without urgency, not chasing, not rushing, just closing the distance the way something moves when it already knows where it's going. A dark SUV rolled to the curb 20 feet ahead and stopped. The door opened. Cole Hargrove stepped out alone. He stood on the pavement and looked at her across the 20 feet of empty sidewalk between them with an expression that contained nothing threatening and nothing soft. Just a clear, direct attention that said he had been looking for her, had found her, and was now prepared to wait for as long as it took for whatever happened next to be entirely her decision. Claire pressed herself harder into the brick. I need to go home, she said, steadier than she expected. I know, he said. My mother, she's safe. I have someone outside your building. Said the way he said everything as a fact that existed in the world. Not a favor. Not a leverage point. She doesn't know anything happened. Mercer's people. Mercer is in federal custody. A pause. Gary is with my people. Frankie is talking. Another pause. It's over. Claire. Those 2 words landed somewhere in her chest she hadn't been prepared for. The specific, unexpected weight of something she hadn't known. She'd been waiting 4 years to hear. It's over. Her back was still against the wall. Her hands were still shaking from the cold. Or from something else. She couldn't separate them anymore. Cole crossed the 20 feet between them, stopped close enough to be heard clearly, and far enough that the choice of what happened next was entirely hers. He reached back into the SUV and held out his jacket. She looked at it, looked at him. You saw me, she said. At the table you saw what I did. Yes. You knew what it meant. Yes. Why didn't you stop me? Cole was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, because it wasn't my call to make. He said, you saw something. You made a decision. In a room full of people who could have done something, he stopped. Let the rest sit unsaid. I wasn't going to take that from you. Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out and took the jacket. It was heavy. Warm in the way things are warm when they've been close to a person for a long time. It smelled like engine oil and cold air and something older than both. She pulled it around her shoulders. For the first time in 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days, she felt something she didn't have a word for, something quieter than safe. Something that had been missing from every room she had moved through for so long that she had almost stopped noticing its absence. Sin. 3 months later, Copperline Lounge closed its doors. The federal warrant covered 4 properties, 11 bank accounts, and 32 years of shipping contracts that had never once reflected what was actually moving through the riverport. The investigation had been building for 6 months before the night at Table 4. What it had needed was one person on the inside willing to talk. Gary Sims talked for 11 hours. The trial lasted 9 days. Mercer's attorney was good, the kind that costs what a house costs. Every month. The evidence was better. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Mercer got 23 years. He stood when the sentence was read. Straightened his jacket with both hands, the same jacket. The same gesture. The same certainty he had carried into every room for 30 years. He looked at the courtroom with the expression of a man who has decided that the only remaining form of dignity is not to show anything. Then he sat back down. Frankie cooperated, received a reduced sentence, and was not heard from again. Gary Sims lost his bartending license and moved to Knoxville to live with his sister. By all accounts, he became a different kind of man, the kind that calls his kids on Sundays. Claire heard all of this secondhand. She wasn't in the courtroom. She had found a job at a breakfast diner on Summer Avenue, the kind of place where the coffee has been on the warmer since 6 a.m. And the regulars have known each other's orders for 15 years, and nobody at any table was deciding anything more consequential than whether to get the biscuits or the toast. She worked the morning shift. She was home by 2. She sat with her mother in the afternoons and watched old movies and breathed the ordinary air of a life that had room in it. Some nights she still heard the crystal hit the marble. Some nights she lay in the dark and felt the exact weight of the tray in her hands, the way you remember physical things with a precision that words can't touch, and watched again the moment Dale Mercer's glass slipped from his fingers. Those nights, she didn't try to make it mean something different than what it was. She had made a choice. In 3 seconds, with shaking hands, alone, in a room full of people who had decided that what happened to other people was not their problem. She had made a different choice. She didn't know if that made her brave. She knew it made her someone she could live with. Cole came into the diner on a Wednesday morning in February. He sat at the corner table and ordered black coffee and 2 eggs over easy and read the paper and didn't say anything until she brought the check. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better," she said, and meant it. He left a tip of $63 on a $9 breakfast. She stood at that table after he left bills in her hand, the morning moving around her. The smell of coffee and the warmth of a room that has been full of people since before the sun came up, and thought about what he had said that night on the corner of Vance and 3rd. Because in a room full of people who could have done something and didn't, you did, there is a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning or a soundtrack. It doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like a woman carrying a tray across a room, hands shaking, face blank, moving through a space where nobody has ever looked at her twice. It shows up in ordinary hands. In the 3 seconds before a decision becomes irreversible, in the specific quiet moment when a person understands that the answer to what happens next is entirely theirs. It asks one question: if not you, then who? Claire Bowen answered that question with a silver tray and 2 seconds of silence. And the most dangerous man in Memphis realized, too late, that the woman he had never once looked at had been watching everything. If this story stayed with you, think about why. There are people moving through rooms around you right now the way Claire moved through that room. Quietly, without making a fuss, carrying something nobody has thought to ask about. You don't need a silver tray. You just need to look. This is Heart Tales. If this story meant something to you, share it with one person today. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. 1, if you're new. 2, if you've been here a while. 3, if you never miss a single one.